Imagine you're walking down the street. Same roads, same buildings, same everyday life. But then a stranger walks past you, someone who looks like he belongs in another time. His clothes are outdated, his haircut is wrong, and when he speaks, it's like he just stepped out of the past. That's exactly what happened in 2006. A young man was found wandering the streets of Kyiv, Ukraine. He looked lost, confused, like he'd just woken up in a world he didn't recognize. When police stopped him and asked for ID, they expected a normal answer. Maybe a misplaced traveler, a drunk, or someone with memory loss. But the ID he handed them? That's where things got strange. It was an authentic Soviet Union ID card. The problem was that the Soviet Union didn't exist anymore. It hadn't existed for 15 years. And when they looked at his birth date, it said he was born in 1932. But looking at him, he couldn't have been older than 25. The photo on the ID matched his face perfectly. The information didn't. At this point, the police had two options. Either this guy was messing with them or something was seriously wrong. So they did the only logical thing. They took him in for questioning. That's when his story took an even stranger turn. At the police station, officers sat him down and started asking basic questions. Name, age, where he was from. He answered without hesitation. His name was Sergei Ponomarenko. He was 25 years old and he lived in Kyiv. So far, so normal. But then they asked, "What year do you think it is?" Without missing a beat, Sergei answered 1958. Now, if you're a police officer hearing this, what do? One officer laughed, thinking it was some weird joke. Another leaned forward, taking a closer look at Sergei. His clothes were strange, outdated, but not in the way of someone wearing retro fashion. They looked authentic. The fabric, the stitching, the way the buttons were made, everything was wrong for 2006. And then there was his reaction. Sergei wasn't panicking, but he wasn't lying either. He was genuinely confused, looking around like the walls themselves didn't belong. He kept asking about familiar landmarks that no longer existed, streets that had been renamed, buildings that had been torn down decades ago. They handed his ID to one of the officers who took a closer look. It was real, not a replica, not a prop. It had all the right stamps, the right paper quality, even a Soviet-era watermark. But the Soviet Union had collapsed 15 years ago. People simply didn't have IDs like this anymore, especially not young people. And yet, there he was, 25 years old, carrying an ID from a country that no longer existed. At this point, they didn't know what to do with him, so they went with the simplest option. They sent him to a mental hospital for evaluation. Maybe he was delusional, maybe he had amnesia, maybe this was some elaborate stunt. At least, that's what they thought, until they found his camera. At the mental hospital, Sergei was placed under the care of Dr. Pavlo Kudrov, a psychologist who had dealt with his fair share of strange cases, but nothing quite like this. The doctor was initially skeptical, but became intrigued by the consistency and detail in Sergei's story, along with the physical evidence provided by the camera and its contents. From the start, Sergei wasn't acting like someone who had lost his memory. He wasn't confused about who he was, only about the world around him. He could recall his job, his home, his friends, his routines, everything about life in 1958. But whenever someone mentioned modern technology, historical events, or even things as simple as the price of food, he had no idea what they were talking about. Dr. Kudrov played along, asking him if he could remember how he got here. Sergei's answer? He had been out for a walk in Kyiv just like any normal day. He had taken his camera with him, an old Yamaflex 2, a Soviet-era model popular among amateur photographers in the late 1950s. And then he saw it, a strange object in the sky, bell-shaped, hovering silently. He lifted his camera and took a picture, and in that moment, as soon as he pressed the shutter button, everything around him blurred. A flash of light, A split second of weightlessness, and suddenly, he was standing in a completely different world. Dr. Kudrov listened carefully, keeping his expression neutral. He had heard plenty of delusional stories before, but there was something different about Sergei. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't trying to convince anyone. He simply didn't understand what had happened to him. Then Sergei said something that changed everything. "Maybe you should just look at my photos." Now here's the problem. The camera Sergei was carrying used film that hadn't been produced in decades. You couldn't just take it into any photo lab. So the doctor called an expert photographer, a man named Vladimir Pozya, to examine it. The first thing Vladimir noticed was that the camera itself was completely authentic, not a replica, not a well-made prop. A real 1950s Yamaflex 2, aged exactly as it should be. Then came the real test, the film roll inside. Now here's where things got really strange. The film was manufactured in 1956, but it was in perfect condition, as if it had been used only yesterday. No sign of degradation, no wear, nothing to suggest it had been sitting around for decades. So with the utmost care, Vladimir developed the negatives. And what they saw? It was impossible. The photographs were of Kiev, but not the Kiev of 2006. These were streets from the 1950s, old cars, Soviet street signs, people in mid-century clothing, buildings that no longer existed. Every single image looked like a perfect time capsule of 1958. And in several of the photos, Sergei was right there, wearing the exact same clothes he had on when he was found in 2006. But then came the final image, the very last picture on the roll, the one Sergei had taken just before everything changed. It showed a bell-shaped object hovering in the sky, a UFO. Dr. Kudrov stared at the developed photos for a long time. He wasn't the kind of person to believe in wild conspiracy theories. He had spent years treating patients with delusions, paranoia, and false memories. But this wasn't some scribbled account in a patient's journal. It wasn't a dream someone had convinced themselves was real. This was physical evidence. Sergei had a camera from the 1950s, using film from the 1950s, developed into photos that looked exactly like Kiev in the 1950s. That shouldn't have been possible. So now, there was a new problem. If Sergei was telling the truth, if he really did take that last picture in 1958 before suddenly waking up in 2006, then what exactly happened? Dr. Kudrov knew there were only two possibilities. Sergei was an incredibly well-prepared fraud, which meant he had access to some of the rarest photographic equipment in the world, plus an impossible level of historical accuracy, or Sergei was telling the truth. And if it was the second one, then what happened to him next is even stranger. At this point, Sergei had no real explanation for what happened. The last thing he remembered before appearing in 2006 was taking the photo of the strange flying object. Then, in an instant, everything changed. There was no transition, no gradual shift, just a moment of light and then a new world. Dr. Kudrov started considering scientific explanations. He wasn't the kind of person to jump to paranormal conclusions. But even physics had some strange possibilities. One theory? Time dilation. It's a concept straight out of Einstein's theory of relativity. The idea is that when you travel close to the speed of light, time slows down for you but continues normally for everyone else. It's been proven with experiments. Atomic clocks flown around the Earth in jet planes come back slightly behind their identical counterparts on the ground. So, if that strange object was moving at near light speed, and if Sergei was somehow caught in its field, then it's theoretically possible that what felt like a second to him could have been decades for the rest of the world. Maybe it wasn't just a UFO. Maybe it was something capable of bending time itself. But before Dr. Kudrov could press further, before he could dig into what Sergei had really experienced, Sergei vanished, and not in the way you'd expect. One night, Sergei was locked in his hospital room as usual. There was only one exit, a heavy door secured from the outside. The windows were barred. There was no way out. Security cameras covered every hallway. A guard was stationed near the entrance. There was no escape route. And yet, by morning, he was gone. The security footage showed him walking into the room, but it never showed him leaving. The only way out was through the locked door, which never opened. There were no holes in the walls, no tunnels, no sign of a forced exit. Nothing. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist. By now, authorities were beyond confused. A missing person showing up out of nowhere was one thing, but a missing person vanishing into thin air, twice? That was something else entirely. The police searched everywhere, hospitals, city records, surveillance archives, but Sergei was gone. And that should have been the end of the story. But then they found something even stranger. Sergei had disappeared before. By now, this wasn't just a strange case, it was something completely unexplainable. A man appears out of nowhere with an outdated ID. He carries a camera with undeniable proof that he came from another time. And then, just as suddenly as he arrived, he disappears again, without a trace. When investigators dug through old missing person reports, they found a record of Sergei Ponomarenko, who had vanished in Kyiv in 1960. A young man, same name, same age, same face. Back then, people had assumed he had simply run away. Maybe a personal dispute, maybe something political. The Soviet Union was a strict place. Disappearances weren't uncommon. But then they tracked down someone who remembered him, his girlfriend. She was in her 70s now, an old woman living quietly in Kyiv. When police showed up at her door and asked if she remembered Sergei Ponomarenko, her reaction was immediate. She nodded, eyes wide. Yes, he disappeared. A long time ago, but he came back. This wasn't the answer they were expecting. According to her, Sergei had vanished one day in 1958, gone without a trace. The authorities at the time had no explanation. One moment he was there, the next he wasn't. Then a few days later he returned. He looked exactly the same, wore the same clothes, acted as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. She said he seemed paranoid, kept looking around like he expected something or someone to take him again. He talked about things she didn't understand, things about the future, things about strange lights and strange places. And then, one day in the 1970s, he disappeared again, for good. For decades she never heard from him, until out of nowhere she received something bizarre in the mail. An envelope, no return address, no explanation. Inside, a photo. It was Sergei, older now, a moustache, wrinkles, but it was undeniably him. And behind him, Kyiv, but not the Kyiv she knew. The skyline was covered in skyscrapers, buildings that didn't exist yet, and on the back of the photo, written in his own handwriting, "I will be back soon." But he never came, and that was the last she ever heard of him. So, what exactly happened to Sergei? Had he been caught in some kind of time loop? Was he moving between decades, pulled back and forth by something we don't understand? Or was this all just an elaborate hoax? Because now, investigators had one more mystery to solve. Was any of this actually real? By now, Sergei's case had taken on a life of its own. Some called it the most compelling time travel mystery in history. Others dismissed it as an urban legend that got out of control. But here's the real question: where's the actual proof? Because when researchers tried to verify the story, things started to fall apart. Let's start with the biggest problem. There are no official records of Sergei existing. No government files, no historical police reports, no official missing persons case from 1960. Every version of the story traces back to one source, a Ukrainian TV show called Aliens, which aired in 2012. And when you dig deeper, it gets worse. The security footage of Sergei in the hospital, there's no real evidence it ever existed outside of the TV show. His old Soviet ID, some say it was an authentic document, but others point out that it looked too much like a modern reproduction. and a photograph purportedly from 2050 received by his girlfriend showing an older Sergei in front of a futuristic Kyiv skyline. A lot of people have analysed it and claim the buildings were copy-pasted from existing city skylines. Whether it was real or not, there's no original source outside of the story itself. Even the show itself had a disclaimer stating that it was recreating stories based on witness accounts, not presenting factual evidence. And yet, despite all of this, it still spread like wildfire. Because even when you debunk the sources, the story itself refuses to die. There's a reason time travel stories never got old. They aren't just stories, they tap into something we all feel but never fully understand: the relentless, unstoppable march of time. Time is the one thing we can't fight. It pulls us forward whether we want it to or not. We measure our lives by it. We fear running out of it. We spend our days wishing we had more of it. It is the only true constant in our existence. And yet, time is also the greatest mystery of all. We live inside of it, yet we don't understand it. We know it moves forward, but we don't know why. We can measure it, track it, count it down, but we can't touch it or reverse it. Or can we? For most of history, time was considered a simple linear force, something that moved in a straight line from the past to the future. Then Einstein came along and shattered that idea. His theory of relativity proved that time is not fixed. It can stretch, bend, and slow down. It all depends on speed and gravity. The faster you move, the slower time passes for you. This isn't just a theory, it's been proven. Astronauts on the International Space Station experience time slightly slower than people on Earth. Their bodies literally age a fraction of a second less because they're moving faster than we are. It's called time dilation, and it means that if you could travel close to the speed of light, time would slow down so much that when you return to Earth, years or even centuries might have passed, but for you, it would have felt like mere moments. And then there's gravity. Massive objects like black holes bend space-time around them. Get too close to one, and time for you could slow to a crawl while the rest of the universe races ahead. This isn't science fiction, this is real physics. Time isn't what we think it is. It's more fragile, more flexible, and more unpredictable than we can imagine. Which brings us back to Sergei. If his story was real, if he really stepped from 1958 into 2006, then something must have interfered with time itself. And what was the last thing he saw before he vanished? A bell-shaped craft hovering in the sky. What if, just for a moment, that craft somehow created a localized distortion in the fabric of space-time? What if Sergei didn't travel through time the way we imagine it, but instead, time itself warped around him? This distortion might have temporarily shifted him into the future, or perhaps into a parallel timeline where 2006 was accessible from 1958. Some physicists speculate that if a powerful enough gravitational or electromagnetic field could be created, it might be able to manipulate time in ways we don't yet understand. However, the technology or energy required for this is beyond our current capabilities. We already know that black holes slow time. What if artificial technology, something far beyond us, could do the same thing? Maybe Sergei wasn't meant to be taken. Maybe he was just standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The story of Sergei Ponomarenko, regardless of its authenticity, touches on fundamental human fascinations with time, mystery, and the possibilities of the impossible. Time is one of the most enigmatic aspects of our existence. Concepts like time travel, whether through machines, natural phenomena, or supernatural events, have captured human imagination for centuries. The Ponomarenko story, real or not, exemplifies our collective curiosity about what time really is and whether it can be navigated in ways beyond our current understanding. The allure of time travel speaks to a human yearning to escape the linear progression of life, to revisit the past, alter mistakes, or preview the future. This desire reflects our discomfort with mortality, regret, and the unknown. At the end of the day, whether or not Sergei's story was true, the mysteries of time is very real. So, was Sergei Ponomarenko a real time traveler? Or was this just a well-crafted myth? Even if it's a hoax, one thing is clear: people want to believe it. Because the idea of escaping time, of breaking free from the past, the present and the future is something deeply human. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, Sergei is still traveling, waiting for the right moment to return. What do you think? Was Sergei just an urban legend, or did something truly impossible happen? Let me know in the comments.